time in conjunction with the portfolio director Alex and Minshull, and hopefully we're getting there with that.
Excellent. So, with the exception of Alpha 7, if everybody's content, all those actions are complete. Excellent. Thank you for that. That then moves us into the Chief's report. Everybody's got a chance to review everything.
Thank you, sir. As you mentioned, this meeting was delayed slightly, so rather than the usual 3-month period, it becomes a 6-month period. Hence the fact that the figures are slightly higher. Well, there are more things. I should note that the OTRIS delay in getting the information from Ascension is we're actually, well, at the time I wrote this, we were a couple of months behind. We've now actually got the up-to-date figures, but I haven't managed to extract them all yet. I don't need to state the blindly obvious that Christmas and New Year have come and gone during the period covered by this. We had more or less the same number of incidents and crimes this year as last. 808 incidents against 867, 102 crimes against 97 during the same period last year. The numbers still are very, very small, and you have to be a bit careful in interpreting any changes within that. On Ascension, there were 139 incidents against 177 and 4 crimes against 2. Again, the numbers are very, very small. Antisocial behaviour in preventing tackle crime. 85 reports of antisocial behaviour across the 6-month period. There are a variety of issues, but the most common are loud noise, particularly in the area of the bridge and some particular locations in residential areas. Animal issues, notably dogs wandering, that has been an ongoing matter that we've had to deal with in various areas. And abandoned 999 calls. If you remember at the last meeting, I indicated we were doing some publicity on that because we were getting somewhere between a dozen and 20 abandoned 999 calls every month. Clearly, you have to follow up on all of those because you don't know whether it's been abandoned because somebody didn't intend to dial 999 or because somebody accidentally pocket dialed 999. We've got those numbers down there now around the 6 to 8 level, but they are still quite. We still have to record each of them because each of them has to be written off and checked. There'll be somewhere we've detected faults with the, well, sure, detected a fault with the phone that's just been dialing 999. And on Ascension, there were only 2 reports of antisocial behaviour in the past few months. Again, violent crime remains relatively low. 34 offences in 6 months compared to 26 during the same period last year. I'll go through the figures in a little bit more, you'll see the figures in a little bit more detail when we come to them. And no violent offences at all in Ascension. Sexual offences, the level of sexual offending remains similar to last year, with 14 offences, 4 of which are historic, recorded since the start of July. There's also currently 1 ongoing investigation into sex offending on Ascension, and expected that matter, together with the other ones, will be brought to court later this year. Protecting vulnerable people, domestic violence. We've had 12 domestic violence and 11 other domestic incidents during the period. As we've repeatedly highlighted, and I've said on numerous occasions, as with other locations, domestic violence is significant, we believe is significantly underreported. The issues that Simon and I and the Minister and the portfolio have been working on have identified some of the offences that don't exist on St Helena that should do, notably the likes of controlling and coercive behaviour, some of the non-violent domestic abuse that is prevalent and we struggle to prosecute. The annual White Ribbon campaign took place in November and was on both islands and was well received in both locations, and that followed shortly after the SCDO funded the deployment of 2 of our staff to the UK, Inspector Stevens from Ascension Island and Cheyenne Furness from the control room, to attend a series of events related to the issue. They found that really useful, and we're very grateful to the FCDO for the funding that they provided for that, and they brought back a number of ideas that we can start to incorporate into our approaches. And also built some very, very useful links for people in the UK who are dealing with these offences on a more regular basis than we are, and we can utilise as subject matter experts and mentors going forward. I've already touched on the Achieving Best Evidence suite on Ascension Island, but suffice to say that the one that we opened in July at Brick House has been very well received and very well used since then. Improving confidence in policing. I'm sad to say recruitment still remains a significant issue on both islands. As of the 31st of December, we were 6 uniformed constables from 16 under strength on St Helena and 2 out of 3 on Ascension. We were also down 2 detective constables, although by now a new one has arrived a week or so ago. And we are down 2 TC uniform sergeants with a replacement not due to arrive until April. We have had some new officers during the last 6 months, 1 new TC sergeant, but that is counteracted by the fact that 2 have left as well as 1 DC. In addition, 1 constable on Ascension left the service in December due to not having successfully completed their probation period. TC officer recruitment remains problematic. Both quantity and quality have declined sharply. For example, we recently advertised for sergeants and we had only 2 applicants who were fit to interview, neither of whom were fit for appointment. We slightly adjusted with the approval of the TC panel the constable and sergeant pay rates last September, and that's marginally improved the number of applicants, but we're still seeing a lot of them are dropping out at various stages in the recruitment process. Most awkwardly after appointment. We are spending a lot of time trying to encourage people to talk to us at the earliest stages of the application process so they fully understand what they're committing to, and it doesn't suddenly dawn on them that they're moving to an island in the South Atlantic with only 1 flight a week. But sadly, it still, on occasion, seems to, well, all too often we lose people. Training the newly appointed officers who joined us last March have continued. 2 out of them at the time of writing this have been accredited for independent patrol, with the other 3 expected to follow shortly. 1 of those was actually signed off yesterday, so there's only now 2 who are non-independent. We're also working with 6 of the staff to qualify them as trainers through a mix of online and on-island training. That's to give us the resilience to continue to deliver training both internally and externally, like so the domestic abuse training. We'll have qualified trainers who can actually deliver that. And they're all local staff. Similarly to the local officers qualified as personal safety trainers following the visit of a UK trainer, and that again provides us resilience to deliver our courses from now onwards. Not just to the police service, we've already delivered 1 course to customs staff, and I think there are another 2 or 3 courses planned for later this year to get them up to speed as well. Community policing, the schools liaison programme continues, as I mentioned at the last meeting, and while that's been quite heavily focused on the secondary schools for now, in the next few weeks, the mini police programme, which is aimed at the primary school years, will be launched as well. That's a volunteer scheme that we discussed with the head teachers for school children aged 8 to 11, and it's basically an educational fun way to get them to associate positively with policing from an early age. Trying to negate the all too frequent, here comes a police officer to lock you up if you're naughty type comments that occur everywhere. So that should hopefully, it also encourages them to be involved positively in their local community activities as well. On Ascension, the team there delivered a cycling proficiency course for the children, and that was again well received, together with meetings and activities. It's not mentioned in the report because I've only had the details in the last couple of days, but towards the end of last year we ran a trust and confidence survey on both islands, St Helena and Ascension. I will circulate the details to all the panel members because it will be supported by a press release over the next week or so. But it was a mix of online and paper copied ones. We had 34 responses on Ascension and 50 on St Helena. On both islands, the majority of people were either neutral, satisfied, or very satisfied with the police activities. Clearly, the figures back up the fact that it was far more positive on Ascension than it is on St Helena, but we still had more than 50% generally were happy that we treat people fairly, we're visible in the community, we're professional. and of those who'd actually had contact with the police, the proportions were slightly higher in terms of their confidence in the police service. Their opinions of crime are different across the two islands. On Ascension, 44% thought that crime had remained the same over the previous years, 44% didn't know, 6% thought it had increased and 6% thought it had decreased. So we clearly need to be a bit better at putting the figures out there, because there's not much clarity there. On St Helena, 16% thought crime remained the same, 30% didn't know, 50% thought it had increased, and 4% thought it had decreased. Again, that comes down to we need to be more transparent in what we are actually recording. But if you remember, our aim is to actually ethically and properly record crime. We don't have a target to reduce the crime figures, we want to make sure we're recording things accurately. That will, on occasion, have a consequence that crime will rise, crime reported numbers will rise. In relation to the issues that people thought we should be dealing with on both islands, they tended to be disorderly behaviour, driving under the influence, driving, stroke speeding on both, sexual offences on St Helena, and theft, which were mentioned on Ascension. The best qualities that were highlighted were that the police were thought to be friendly and approachable, and that we were trying to do our best within the community, although that was one of the suggestions about how we should be more effective, was to be more visible in the communities. Recruit more officers. I'm not going to argue with that, I completely agree. I think we should. I think it would be really good to be able to do that. And more foot patrols, visibility across the field. There's a cohort of people who think there should be a better fitness test for the police. Again, don't disagree with that. Community engagements, and as I said, drink driving. Both islands were keen that some elements of anonymous reporting should be implemented. Something we're looking at in terms of trying to find a way of reporting things anonymously. It's very difficult on an island the size of St Helena or Ascension Island, because more or less by reporting it, you identify yourself anyway. So we are looking at ways in which that could be done with either a voicemail or something along those lines, but we'll see what we can try and do for it to try and respond to it. So this will be formally, well, as I say, I will circulate the results to all of you, and then there'll be some press releases on both islands and some social media stuff to thank everybody. The response rate was higher. We had far more responses by doing it online than we did on the old paper ones. The paper ones, we just get 20 or 30. We've got 30 on Ascension, 50 on St Helena. So it has worked.
Before we carry on, any questions on anything in the process from so far? Well, thanks to that. Then choose a stage. Then I'll.
Okay, going back to where we were up to in the report, social media, that continues to grow. We've now got over 2,100 followers on the Facebook page, of which approximately a quarter are located on one of the two islands. The last few months have seen over 16,000 views of our content and over 200 comments in relation to posts. Those comments provide very prompt feedback, which is really useful to us. So again, that seems to be an area that will grow. In relation to complaints and discipline, in my previous report I referred to 3 complaints that were ongoing. They've been resolved and didn't result in any formal action, i.e. written warning or above, to the officers concerned. In the past 6 months we've had an additional 3, and they're all currently under investigation. They've been assessed as potentially involving misconduct rather than gross misconduct. And if you remember, the protocol of Hampshire is its gross misconduct referred for a review. One civilian member of staff was dismissed in September following an investigation into actions that didn't take place here, and there's also one ongoing internal disciplinary matter that's currently being dealt with one member of staff. I won't rehash the criminal legislation, other than to mention the fact that myself and Simon were invited with Alex to attend the Executive Council yesterday, where it was agreed that the legislation to increase regulation for the service vehicle drivers and reduce the driver limit was agreed to be put before Legislative Council at the next meeting, for which we're very grateful. Budget. Yeah, the budget has been under considerable pressure in the past few months because of a number of serious incidents on both islands. We've had to get support from UK officers and move an increased number of staff between Ascension and St Helena, all of which comes at a cost. And I'm very, very grateful for the support of both governments and the FCDO in helping us to address those issues. The MOU between the police and AIG has been reviewed, but we're still waiting the resolution of the consultations between the two finance teams around taxation and administrative costs.
Simon, do you want to comment on that point?
Yeah, I can shift my camera as well. Yeah, just to say that there's been an exchange of emails, and I think we're very close to that now. Exchange of emails was literally this morning, David. So I'm hopeful that we can introduce that system from the 1st of April 2025. We're just working through the last elements of it with the Financial Secretary and Secretary.
Thank you, Simon.
So you've already touched on the inspection. We've not received the final report, but I think it's fair to say the initial feedback was broadly positive and identified the progress that's been made since the HMIC inspection in 2020. They were particularly impressed by our custody and control room processes, and they've taken some of those away and they hope to use them as models and examples for other overseas territories to follow, which was really reassuring to see. Especially given that custody was one of the areas that was highlighted as a particular weakness by the HMIC when they came in 2020. Obviously, the construction and implementation of the new custody suite has helped that enormously. Again, to keep you cited, while we've not received the formal recommendations, one of the suggested changes was to move from a detective chief inspector as a deputy chief of police to a uniform chief inspector supported by a detective inspector instead. As a result of that, because we were due to select a replacement for DCI found, whose contract comes to an end at the end of March, that was changed, and we have now advertised for a uniform chief inspector, which was placed in December, and 2 candidates will be interviewed. It says later in the report they're actually being interviewed on Friday. So hopefully in the short term we'll have a preferred candidate identified. Hopefully we'll be able to get them through the onboarding process quite quickly. One of the initial benefits of this is that it will allow our local staff to potentially develop into that role. Developing towards being a detective chief inspector would always have been a real challenge because of the level and breadth and depth of experience that that role requires. But a uniform chief inspector, there is no reason to suppose that a local officer shouldn't be able over the next few years to develop into that role and potentially take over from that person as and when they move, and then in due course progress towards being a St. Helena chief of police. There's nothing to prevent it. Also, Andrew Monday's visit, who's the police advisor for the FCDO, visited Ascension and has identified the need to develop and improve the custody facilities there, and has allocated some funds to allow the installation of CCTV, which the procurement of is ongoing at the moment. So by the time we have our next meeting, it should we hope it will be installed. That will provide much needed reassurance for detainees, their representatives, and for us as a service that our standards can be maintained as high as possible in relation to custody, and we are delivering consistent standards across both islands.
I think let's just pause there. I realise most of you should give your comments at the end, but do any of the panel members wish to talk on any of the feedback with regard to the initial findings of the report?
It's fundamentally physical assault, ranging from common assault through assault occasioning actual bodily harm, grievous bodily harm, wounding, attempted murder and murder. The latter ones, we will no doubt be pleased to hear, we haven't had any more. So it's physical rather than verbal assault.
Can I go on? Yeah, and when we talk about the staffing, and you mentioned about the thing being raised to hopefully encourage more staff. Any other issues that creates issue with dropping out of potential candidates?
When you go back to individuals who we have selected and they drop out, it's more or less without exception because they've now decided that this is not a place that they want to come and work. Yes. Yeah. But hence the reason why we're trying to invest at the earliest possible stage in the selection process, the time to explain to them what living on St Helena or Ascension Island is like, and the huge benefits that you get, but the challenges they will face as well. Because it's important that we're honest with people. Otherwise, we will waste a lot of time and money bringing them here to lose them within the first couple of months anyway. Now, thankfully, when they get here, the vast majority of people stay for the duration of their contracts. But it's the challenges between that point. There have undoubtedly been occasions where individuals have applied without fully considering what it involved. I suspect on one or two occasions they might have applied without actually explaining to their families what was involved. And that has then raised some eyebrows when they've announced where they're departing.
I think it'd be fair to say, Gillian, this is not unique to the police. We see it across a number of employment firms, sadly.
The other factor that I think it's only fair to mention is that being as most of our police TC police recruits come from the UK, the policing environment in the UK has changed quite considerably over the last 5 or 6 years in relation to their pay and conditions, pension arrangements, the actual pressure on police services to achieve and maintain numbers of officers. So the ability of services to release people on career breaks, officers are retiring later at a higher age, and their desire to come and do something different at that point, they're all impacting on our ability to attract people from overseas.
Complaints and discipline. During the past 6 months, 3 candidates have received their currently under investigation. Is there sort of a time frame?
Some complaints are dealt with very, very quickly, some within a week or two. Others take a little bit longer. It depends very much whether there's a criminal case running alongside the complaint, because if, for example, somebody's been arrested and makes a complaint, in many cases that complaint has to be delayed until after the criminal case, because we can't undermine the criminal case by running a complaint investigation at the same time. So one of those that I mentioned last time took nearly 5 months resolved, because it took that long for the case to come to court. We knew what was going to happen with it, but we couldn't actually resolve it until the case had been to court. So that's what tends to be the delay. Other ones, sometimes it's the availability of witnesses, and also sometimes the location of the person who's making the complaint. If they're on island, it's a lot easier. We get complaints from people from off island as well, and we obviously have to record and deal with them, saying that they take, by the time you're passing the emails backwards and forwards, it takes a little bit longer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then if we move to delivering justice for victims.
Okay, obviously the back of the report contains the figures for the last 6 months in relation to total offences and detections. Again, as a development for this, what I would like to do in the future is also include the under investigations as a separate column, because we're never at an actual point where they've all either been investigated. It's always something that's ongoing. So, for example, many of the there's a number of sexual offences that are still waiting to go to court, some domestic violence incidents still going to court, some of the violence against the person is still going to court. So, with everybody's agreement, I think that might be a slightly more clear way to go forward, so you can see what we're actually dealing with. I think I've already described in the past what a detection is, and it doesn't necessarily involve a conviction. So the rules are slightly different, hence the reason why Simon's figures that you've been given at the start of this are not, that there isn't an exact match across the two. One thing that obviously Simon also doesn't see, but again, if the panel wishes we can produce for the future, is the individuals who are dealt with by us by means of caution or out-of-court disposal. The out-of-court disposals that Simon mentions are the ones that have gone through him for advice. whereas obviously there's a number of them that we will deal with at first point of contact with caution.
Yeah, there are a number of them as well that where I am presented with a file for advice, where my advice may be to deal with the case by way of an out-of-court disposal, which are not included in my figures. My figures only include the cases that had reached court in the first instance, and don't include the number of cases that I provide advice on where there's either insufficient evidence or they're dealt with by way of out-of-court disposal, or it's not in the public interest.
Is there interest in that, or do you wish to see those figures? I mean, if they don't need to be captured, so they'll be captured. If they don't need to be reported, we won't. But would you wish to see them?
I would think that you want them modest injections of big precautions and so forth. If people in charge, given modest injections in here. So when you got this form, it should have all the information in. Silence is just mainly about convictions, and if the people are charged, they will really show us convictions in terms of the police law.
So would you like a breakdown of why they were detected, i.e. charged, caution, or that?
From my perspective, the main thing is that you show the detections. My concern would be if you had X amount of offences which should be detectable, and we've got a very low statistic in terms of detections. So I'd be wondering what's going on with the police service in that respect. But if they've got like 50 cases and 49 before you detected, they wouldn't have too much of a concern in terms of that. Because there's processes that you have to go through. It's not all the cases that are going to end up in court. You have caution passes and so forth. So I personally have an issue with that, and I will explain it to constituents. Catherine might have a different view to it.
I think I find it helpful to know that someone's still in the system.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, as a layperson, I will read this and think, well, that's, if you look at the first two figures, we've got 18 people just not to over it. Well, actually, we're not got to one.
And there are a proportion who will not have met the threshold for one reason or another. But again, that depends on the reasons why a job is detected are quite limited. The reasons why a job will an incident investigation will never result in a detection are many and varied, ranging from gaps in the evidence or an inability to reach a particular standard, to reach a charging standard. Sometimes a victim failing to actually cooperate at some point during the investigation, or what the victim's account not being supported by independent witnesses. There are all sorts of reasons. It's much easier. I think the under-investigation bit, so you can see what is still ongoing, would be useful. I think the detection reason is simple. The reasons why things aren't detected is far more complicated.
That's the ongoing, so things that being detected, these are still being investigated.
Well, then, let's put that in. I think, as David said at the outset, this is going to be an evolving document as we try to get into something that gives us the information we need. If we can consider the questions posed by the minister, David, on how you might deal with that, I don't expect you to give an answer right now. But let's continue to evolve this. Let's continue to try and give the information.
This suggestion is probably not an investigation, because Catherine saying before, but between treatment and coercions and everything else and so forth, there's just a gap between which is the issue. Yeah. And if it shows an investigation, then you would know it's taking a little bit wrong.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
That's very sensible. Like,
if you could work it up better.
yeah, that's no problem.
Okay, so that's an action on the chief.
Okay, moving on from the actual figures then, notable convictions, we've had several, and I know Simon highlights some of those in there, so I won't rehash those. We had one offender sentenced to over 20 years for a historic case, which again is reassuring in that we are getting victims coming forward from many, many years ago, and we've been able to successfully bring those offenders to justice, and I'm very grateful for the support from Catherine's team in terms of supporting the victims, and particularly from Simon and the Attorney General's chambers in the work that goes into getting those matters to court. touching on what the Victim Support Scheme does, that was also recognised and allocated some funding by the FCDO following the inspection, and I'm really grateful that they recognised the importance of that within our community. It provides a vital adjunct to the police service. In terms of roads, making our roads safer, the number of collisions has remained, well, you can see more or less where it is. The vast majority of them are damage only. Unfortunately, in October, we saw a fatal road traffic collision, which was obviously the death of one person. As with the event, similar event on Ascension the year before, we had to seek support of specialist staff from Hampshire Constabulary to assist with the investigation, specifically a forensic vehicle examiner and collision investigator. And the contribution of those two staff was absolutely invaluable because they were able to definitively establish why that collision occurred. And that helped guide both us in terms of our investigation and the coroner in terms of his responsibilities as well. And I'm particularly grateful for the funding, the extra funding that's been allocated by SSHA to cover the cost of that deployment. It is of necessity expensive. We cannot maintain those skills on Ireland. They are too high level and too rarely used. Fixed penalties. I hope that we're not too far away from the amended regulations now.
In advance of today's meeting, I've spoken to my colleagues in Chambers, and I understand that they are currently with the drafter. We obviously have two drafters now, it's with our file and drafter, and hopefully will be ready to be presented imminently.
Good. And finally, I've been a member of a group that's been looking at producing the policy options for the Minister to take roads, road safety and roads policy forward. So I think we've had a draft of that now, Minister, if I'm correct. Yeah, policy options. And obviously I look forward to what developments that might bring. And that concludes my report, sir.
Thank you. Before I come to the room, let me just say, Simon, any questions on the Chief's report?
No questions from me, just a comment in terms of the improvements to the custody suite. Purchase order has been raised, the company has been appointed to do it, and those works will proceed in the next, I anticipate in the next 1 to 2 months, depending on getting the equipment that's required onto the island. But it's all funded, all set up and progressing.
Great, that's really good. Thank you, Simon. Before I go, also, hopefully you've had the opportunity to ask the Chief of the speakers to go through criminal court statistics. Any questions on that?
Sorry, just one on the driving and struggle. Obviously, that's the highest number of cases. I think that's helpfully makes it.
Yeah.
What we're pushing towards maybe just highlights the issue that we're trying to.
Absolutely. I won't make any comments at this stage, but thank you, Alex. Catherine, anything? No? Okay, Minshull.
First of all, I'd just like to mention that the panel received an email from the media, the representative of the media, of some issues in terms of policing. So I found that too, because from my perspective, it's about process, and we're not here to coming here to those for the problem, this, that, and the other, we're not here for that. They should actually go through the appropriate process. My only concern is with the issues raised and so forth. People might have the feeling that I've raised this and mentioned this before, that the process is probably not appropriate to report the police about the police, so that it's where people might not feel they want to do that in a small society, but also that the government is responsible for policing, and that's where I've mentioned in various forums before. in terms of accountability, there needs to be political oversight. I think you mentioned that the police visit, when we did the police visit, I raised it again. When we did the governance visit, I raised it there. I also raised it in the last fan visit as well. And me and the government have already had discussions about that. But in respect of the email from the vice, I would raise the issue about the details and so forth. This is a process. And he has the right, as a member of the media, to approach the government and the chief of police and question what's out there. That's not part of it. As members of the panel, the TORs, we have to look at that. Police reform plan, any suggestions about the police reform plan, scrutinize the police reform plan. So I just thought I'd raise that, because you might, when this comes out, want to know if we raised it. So just one for you.
If I may, Minister, there's been quite a lot on social media lately, flagging up issues in relation to potential complaints. In some cases, rehashing complaints that were reported, recorded and dealt with many years ago. We have gone out again and said to people that this is the way to deal with it. I fully appreciate your views, and are the same wherever police complaints are investigated. There's always concerns about complaints against the police being reported to police, but that's the system we have to operate legally. We've gone out again and reminded people if they have a complaint, alluding to it on social media will not get it investigated. If they report it, we will look at it, we will look at everything. It will get reported to you in terms of the numbers of complaints, and it will be formally resolved one way or the other. We can't promise that people will like the results, but they will always get a result.
Yeah, like I said, I'm raising it, I understand the system, and we have told people what the system is.
And I think we just need to keep reiterating what that system is, just so that people have the confidence that they can report it.
I think just from my perspective, Chief's commented on the complaint system. In terms of the governance structure, it's a structure that's really imposed on us by the UK overseas territories relationship with the overseas territories. Our model in terms of the governor being ultimately responsible is consistent with overseas territory constitutional settlements. What this panel seeks to do is increase the transparency, but as you say, there's no point in reiterating all of that. The other challenge we face with the Royal St Helena Police Service, which can't be ignored, I respectfully suggest, is it deals with more than just St Helena. It also deals with Ascension Island, and that broader pan-territory responsibility makes it complex, to say the least, were we not to have the model we have where the governor's in charge. I'd also say there is an operational advantage in one person who has responsibility on both sides, given the nature of offending. But you have, as you've said, Ben, so you've raised your points, and I don't know that we'll achieve much by repeating this. But it is my hope that through this body there is at least a voice. That is the absolute intent, and it's why it's open to the public as well. But understood? But please, listen.
The other thing was going to raise, I think Jenny's going to raise this now. We did say it before, we speak to the chief container down the months and the report is now on the website. I think we will give some reasons for that, but I do believe that we should be more open and transparent in terms of the reports that we get, because people don't know what we're talking about very much here. Chief said, and also the main base, but if we compare, just a suggestion to put these reports out on the website.
The report is written for a public meeting, so the fact that I've read it makes no difference whether it's published or not, as far as I'm concerned. My view would be that I would prefer, if it was to be published in future, it comes to the panel first and it's published after the event rather than before it, because that would also give the panel the opportunity to say that perhaps that bit should be redacted before a publication. if there was a feeling that something was a little too...
Yes.
Obviously, we have to be very conscious that talking about anything almost inevitably identifies somebody or
Yes.
something.
I think, Councillor, you were going out. My personal view is this is a public meeting. You have read pretty much verbatim what the report says.
Yeah.
It is recorded. There are members of the public present. It would be bizarre if we didn't issue the report as written. There may be things that may be sensitive, but I think I would struggle to think why we can't put that on the website.
I have certainly no objections.
I was going to say, just simply as I do agree with the sequencing there. I think the panel should see it first, and then it goes on to the website. I think it would be a little premature for we to do the way around.
We do have that period between the issue where we can comment, where we put in comments to, so it could be available to the public.
Say again, I'm
So
sorry.
it could, because we have it's 2 weeks, isn't it? That
It's a week in advance.
we have advance, but we have plenty of time to read it and go back with any concerns that somebody might be identified or something like that.
Yeah, so,
So we've had an opportunity before we've sat down here
yes.
to make those comments and to protect people's privacy.
So are we of one concurrence then? I'm sorry.
What I was going to say is that the query I had with regards to the department was things that I was saying is fine. We've also copied a hard copy we put in the library and the post office, this paper and constituent, for those who don't have access to the website.
There was no problem with that. Again, sequencing, it will probably have to be just after that. We can make the copies available to the members of the public. Yeah, but yes, I have no problem with that.
So to summarise, we continue with the release policy, which is 1 week before, gives panel members the opportunity to make a comment if there's any issues that need to be addressed. And then panel members make any comments to the chief ahead of this meeting. The report that is presented to this meeting is then put on the website, and a hard copy is put in the library and the post office. Customer service.
Post office.
I don't know if it's anywhere on Ascension.
Would you, well, the website's the website. Simon, I'll let you decide if you need to put a hard copy somewhere.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't see why it can't be online.
Okay. All right, so we agreed? Great. Okay, so that will be the procedure for the report going forward. Thank you.
The other thing here is the statistics. You've got those things covered it. There also hit some concerns raised freely as well. Some cases could be dealing with historical cases. Can we somehow make the next list in the year of those cases and just to say X amount is historic? Some people see this is what's happening this year, but then you've got the historic cases as well.
I mean, to be fair, the vast majority of the historic ones revolve around sexual offences.
Yeah.
Most of them are the historic.
Yeah.
Almost all the others are dealt by new ones. And I can be a bit more explicit perhaps within the body of the report about what proportion of sexual offences are historic. I think I mentioned to the list that there were sexual offences, 14 offences, 4 of which historic. So you've got 4 out of 14 were historic in this particular period.
So I think people want some reassurance that it's all not happening now, and so going out and how these issues are happening.
I can say that some of the offences that I've dealt with, when I've said six offenders who've been charged with sexual offences that year, I think it's probably a 50-50 split off the top of my head as to whether or not it's been more recent sexual offending or historic, and certainly things going forward that there are both historic and recent matters moving forward.
These are just people that what's going on.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Then, I think we mentioned this previously as well, the incidents that we've got a total number of incidents, 1,218 incidents. So when you look at it, obviously this is not wrong. Here are incidents that we put down, and I'm just put my So you think the numbers could get number of breath tests, 50, so they're telling us up to the 1,000.
No, there's a lot of other categories of incidents that don't perform either a crime or anything else that aren't on this particular list. There are dozens of different incident classifications. If you would like to see the incident classification breakdown, I can produce that next time if you would like, so you can see what all of those incidents are. It's an indication of the level of work that the control room is carrying out, but obviously they also provide services for all the emergency services, fire, ambulance, police and sea rescue. We can certainly break them down, the incidents, rather than include them in the crime figures. I can put a separate thing for that as well.
Crime figures, because when you look at this here, it seems a bit skewed, something just go to the government crime, that's when we put that into this 1,218 crimes other than the ones mentioned here.
No, I will break those out and we'll have a separate appendix next time with the incident classification so you can see what sort of incidents we are actually dealing with.
Yeah, but just my worry is the whole list is going to be on this is the comments saying to me that it's about 218 incidents and 4,000 people on the water.
As I say, when you see that, hopefully that will provide some reassurance, because the vast majority of the things that we record as an incident aren't a crime and don't involve any risk to anybody, but they are recorded as incidents. For example, I know, as I was looking at the figures today, there were, over the course of the year so far, there have been nearly 200 ambulance calls. So ambulance calls sit within this as well, because the control room manage all those responses as well.
And of course, what social workers.
There's all sorts of stuff, but hopefully that breakdown will give you some confidence.
Because I suppose when you got the police and the stuff, as opposed to the control room.
Yeah.
I think, well, thank you for that, it's taking.
Okay, and if you like, what I will do is I'll get the figures for April to December that would have been covered by this report and circulate them separately to you, so you've got something in the interim before, rather than waiting for the full 3 months. And then obviously the next one will have the years figures.
I just want to touch on something else in terms of discipline side of it, and you don't get any gross misconduct, you don't get misconduct cases at the moment. And somebody else put a time period, so that what is the normal time period for not gross misconduct, and misconduct which should be lower. Can you give us what's time on
The aim is to resolve everything within 28 days. But as I mentioned, sometimes if there's a criminal matter ongoing at the same time, then that 28 days effectively doesn't start until the end of the criminal matter. It depends very much on the circumstances, because sometimes we can deal with the complaint in parallel. There are other occasions where, for example, we had a complaint related to a particular matter that was going to court. We actually went to, even though it didn't involve gross misconduct, we went to Hampshire for some advice about whether we could progress the complaint or should progress the complaint at the same time. Their advice was no, they would always wait until after the end of the criminal. By all means gather the evidence, but you can't actually technically resolve it. So as a result, that one took 5 months. But our target is always within a month, 28 days, a month.
They're decimating on the time frames of genuinely.
And most of them are resolved in a lot shorter period than that, because they are relatively simple to do.
Anything outside of that, you don't have complex issues and so forth. So at least the public understand that between the days we should, as opposed to just leaving someone's member of staff sitting here for 3 months and then come back and say, here's a caution.
And if I can offer some reassurance to you, vast majority of our complaints are not about officers doing the wrong thing. They're mostly about doing the right thing in the wrong way. If you understand the difference between it, which is why they're misconduct, not gross misconduct. Because doing the wrong thing is potentially gross misconduct. Doing the right thing, but not doing it as well as you should have done. And as a result of that, that's mostly, and a lot of that is a reflection on the level of experience that we have within the team.
Meaning process and procedures.
Yeah, process and procedures. Yeah, that's always been the case. That's not a unique situation.
Yes, I just want to talk about roads. We've got an engineering roads policy. I just want to make sure it's not a full context. So maybe we can part of a group, and what you said about is complete is particularly from my perspective, because you have the roads policy officer, who gives the options, policies and so forth, but there's a number of processes that we go through. So we get the input from the relevant group. There's based on the policy and set by the minister. This covers a number of areas, and this design produce benefits for road users going forward. So the way I see this written is from your perspective.
Forgive me if I've been very careful.
Just clarify here.
My understanding was that you've now received the policy options paper, and that was the bit that I was commenting on that was done.
So, this still have that to connect, because there's a number of processes that we need to go through, just like what we do with immigration, just to ensure it's in line. So I just released about there, and then the Phillips penalty, bargaining reference penalties from a political standpoint. Yes, we are waiting on Phillips penalties, but it's not a whole lot in terms of ministers or politicians. We set the direction. It also concerns marine enforcement and so forth. So it's more about the holistic view of Phillips penalties. And we are frustrated with that. The Attorney General's changed his working on that, and there has been mentioned about 3 which was the Attorney General previously raised about these issues and to move forward. So hopefully we should have a smaller.
I've been doing my bit to ensure that that goes forward, is all I can say.
Like I say, that's the possible direction given by the government. So we want to pursue notices. The law is in place. The regulations are in place. We just need to enact it. There's a few minor changes that need to be made, and then we'll be enacted. And it's better for the better.
I think the only comment I would make is we need to be cognizant that the workload on Chambers is huge. It's a small number of people. It is one of those points in the process where when you are waiting for something from Chambers, I can understand there be some frustration. I don't wish to give blanket excuses. It's not what it's about. It's about understanding the amount of workload and the flow through Chambers and the resource available to do it. Work has been done to try and increase the number of people in Chambers. We're about to get another colleague into Chambers in the near future. But I think there needs to be also some attention given to how we manage the demand, because the demand outstrips the supply at the moment, and there needs to be some work on that. That's a much broader piece. It goes across the entire panoply of the legislative agenda of government, and it's something that needs some attention, which I hope will be coming in the not too distant future.
I think I was just trying to cover because the Attorney General gave explanations in the formulation of consent.
Understood.
I think that's pretty much me. And just to say, you also understand as the boosters in terms of the shortfalls. I think the government's going to mention about the shortfalls was daily just been off as well. You are carrying it.
So, yeah, thank you for that. I was going to make a few comments about the inspection report. As I say, we don't have it yet. I have a note from the lead officer. It's basically an update. The chief in his brief gave a number of points which I think and hope the panel found useful. We have had particular issues at the leadership level in the senior officer cadre. That's as a consequence of illness, but simply we know the deputy has been off island now for a protracted period. As was outlined there, we hope we are closing quickly on the resolution of that with an appointment with a good officer. The chief himself then had a period of unforeseen illness, albeit kept turning up at work, but that did lead to some challenges, and I'm grateful genuinely to the officers who stepped up to plug the gap. Chief was still answering the phone, which meant that we didn't put in a measure to have an alternative acting chief of police, but unquestionably that put a lot of pressure on people, and people really did come forward, and I'm grateful, including an officer who literally arrived the weekend before he found himself being the senior officer assisting, albeit not the acting chief of the reasons I've said. If I turn to the chief, particularly the chief appointment will be advertised in the first week of February, with the intention of a replacement August, September of this year at the end of David's long service to the Royal Centre Police Service itself. We will put significant effort into advertising that in the hope that we'll get a good range of candidates. I am cognizant of some of the challenges that the chiefs pointed out. We'll give it our best shot. I hope we get a good chief who will be responsible, as I've said, not just for St Helena, but also for Ascension, and go forward from there. Some of the other points that came from the report, just to re-emphasise, the decision has been made ahead of the report coming through that the deputy will be uniformed, not a detective. That does give us more capacity on the uniform side. Very grateful to the FCDO police advisor for his financial support in us securing a detective inspector in the interim to provide senior investigating officer cover. How we proceed forward on that is something we need to work on. The other thing that was pointed out, and it makes sense to me by the team, is the need to consider a tiered approach to police responses, and really this is just seeking to codify the reality of what has happened already. So when there's a very sad fatal road traffic accident, the need to ask for support. So tier 1, local, can't deal with it. Tier 2, you go for external support. And then a tier 3, which would be that it's not within St Helena's direct gift to be able to deal with an incident where you'd be looking for a significant UK resource, albeit it remains within the jurisdiction of St Helena. That will never be put in question. But I think that sort of leads on to what I'm going to be asking the panel to consider. We will look to refresh the police and crime panel in the near future, and as you pointed out yourself, Minister, one of the primary purposes of this panel is to seek your input on, are those objectives correct? Do we adjust? Do we not? Your consultation, it's not just welcome, it's being asked for. That's why I set this up in the first place, so we can get that. So we'll get the process in place for you to look at the objectives and make sure that we're proceeding in the right direction on that one. Final point from me, I think for now, before we go to any questions and then AOB, clearly the workload on the police service over the Christmas period, when one considers the shortage of officers we have, has been heavy. But I have to say, the police service in my opinion, did a fantastic job. I thought they got the balance right between being present, but without being invasive. I would like to commend what I saw at the Festival Lights. I thought that was absolutely spot on, the way that was done. And it's a difficult one to balance, but I hope the community feels that there is a degree of responsiveness from the police in how the community wishes to be policed. Certainly that was something that was picked up by the the report team, who noted, doesn't surprise me, who noted the very positive manner in which people engage with the chief and other officers on the street. And I think that's really, really good. The same is true on Ascension, Simon. I know the really good work that's going on there, and you have very kindly kept me up to date with the positive responses that those on Ascension have also offered towards the police. That's probably enough from me. Are there any questions on what I've said before I move to AOB? Okay, then I'll start. Sorry. No? Okay. Then I'll start on the screen. Simon, any AOB?
No, nothing from me, thank you.
Councillor. Minister. Catherine.
It's not really new business, but I'm currently in the process of reviewing our strategic plan and really of that. But also it's our 10th anniversary this year, so I've been looking back around minutes around paperwork and things, and what struck me very, very clearly was the vast change in local policing is happening. We have had our top complaints for the first 2 years with police. The graph was always raised for police. It does not appear anymore. We have very, very few complaints, and I would like to make my appreciation of that, but the change in the work that we would have to do. If there is an issue, it's dealt with incredibly quickly. It doesn't go nuclear. It's not serious. Well, it's serious for the person, but it's not serious in terms of complaints. And just looking back over the last 2 years, the changes have been. So I wanted to say thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for taking the time to do that, and all leaders will thank their team ahead of themselves, but given the amount of time you have held your post, I think David, you can rightly.
I think there's also a coincidence in the dates, so yeah.
It's very kind of you to say so, I really appreciate it.
Alex?
Nothing from me.
No, sir.
Chief. Well then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attendance today. My thanks to the Secretary for taking the minutes, much appreciated. Simon, everybody in the room, thank you.